Hey everyone, and welcome back to This Explainer. Okay, today we're going to put on our historical detective hats because we've got a massive puzzle to solve. We're looking at the most famous story in human history, but here's the catch. There are 4 completely different versions of it. So, grab your magnifying glass. We're going to uncover who the 4 evangelists actually were, when and where they lived, and how on earth their stories made the jump from just spoken words to the written portraits of Jesus that we still have today. Let's get into it.
I mean, have you ever actually wondered why we don't just have one single uniform book about the life of Jesus? Honestly, it seems like it would be so much simpler, right? But instead, we've got these 4 totally distinct accounts: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the wild part is, sometimes they share the exact same details, word for word, but other times, they completely disagree, or they just entirely leave out massive stories. Like, why would ancient writers do that? Well, to figure it out, we've got to travel all the way back to the very first century.
So, to really understand this puzzle, we've got to start with the word gospel itself. It literally just means good news. You see, these early preachers weren't standing around giving boring lectures on abstract philosophy. No, they were urgently talking about real, shocking events that were happening right then, in their own lifetimes. It was breaking news. And they were the actual eyewitnesses to a huge historical figure whose personality had just completely burned itself into their memories.
All right, moving into our first section, spoken words to written text.
You have to remember, back in the ancient world, people couldn't just pull out a smartphone to record a speech. Long before anybody wrote a book, early followers essentially played this massive, highly serious game of telephone. Since Jesus was a traveling teacher, a ton of the gospel material actually comes from little snippets or key sentences from his sermons. Basically, he'd teach and then give a really catchy summary or a quick little story to just hammer his point home. And the early Christians carefully memorized these punchlines and short stories. So when they eventually went out on their own preaching missions, they had this incredible built-in mental deposit of sayings to build their own sermons around.
Okay, so how did all of that actually get written down? Well, the writer Luke Boss lays it out for us in 3 distinct steps. Step 1 is just raw eyewitness memory, the people who actually saw and heard these things firsthand. Step 2 features the people who started gathering and compiling all those memorized punchlines. And finally, Step 3 is Luke's actual job. He took all those scattered bits and pieces and smoothed them out into a single, orderly written account.
Which brings us right into Section 2, the synoptic problem explained. Now that word, synoptic, it literally just means seen together, and it refers to the first 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And guys, when you read them side by side, you see these insane similarities. It's honestly like they were copying off the same homework. I mean, sometimes they use the exact same words in the exact same sequence. But then right alongside those similarities, you've got these major divergences. They have totally different themes. They swap the order of events around, and sometimes they just leave out massive stories that the others made sure to include. So to solve this so-called problem, we can't just stare at the text. We actually have to look at the human beings who wrote them.
Let's jump into Section 3. Meet the 4 evangelists.
To really solve this puzzle, we kind of have to treat these authors like 4 different journalists. Imagine they're all covering the exact same event, but for completely different audiences. And they're all dealing with their own wild local crises. Looking at this timeline really helps us understand their chaotic world because, let me tell you, this was not a peaceful time to just sit down and write a book. In 64 CE, the Roman Emperor Nero falsely accused Christians of burning down Rome. This unleashed a terrible persecution where early leaders like Peter and Paul were actually killed. And then, shortly after that, a massive Jewish rebellion against the Romans broke out, which ended with the literal burning of the sacred temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE. So it was this intense era of trauma, combined with the fact that the original eyewitnesses were passing away, that urgently pushed these writers to start getting the story down on paper. So the crucial takeaway here is that each writer was responding to their own unique time and place. Mark wrote first, right smack in the middle of that trauma between 65 and 70 CE. And because his community was going through such terrible pain and persecution, Mark's version heavily emphasizes suffering. He really wants his readers to know that Jesus understands their pain. Then you have Matthew, who's writing a little bit later, in the 70s. Matthew is writing specifically for Jewish converts. These were people trying desperately to hold on to their ancient traditions after the devastating loss of their temple, so he focuses on showing how Jesus fulfilled their history. Next up, we have Luke, the grand historian. He actually wrote this massive two-part saga, the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles. You can kind of think of it like a giant folding picture frame, where the city of Jerusalem acts as the central hinge. The Gospel story travels toward Jerusalem, and then the Acts of the Apostles travels outward from it. Also, what's really unique about Luke is that he highlights women over and over again as the ultimate role models of courage. He constantly contrasts their bravery with the men who, well, kind of ran away during the tough times.
And that brings us to John. Now, as the renowned biblical scholar Raymond Brown points out, John's gospel wasn't just written once on a random Tuesday and published. No, it was a living document. The original author preached and taught, gathered his material into a gospel, and then literally made it a second edition later on to answer new problems his community was facing. And even after his death, his followers stepped in and made a final redaction, which, by the way, is just a fancy scholar word for final edits. It was literally a massive team effort across generations.
Because it developed in this huge collaborative way, John's version is totally different from the other three. He completely skips the standard historical approach, like there is no baby in a manger here. Instead, he immediately zooms way out to this cosmic scale. Right in his opening lines, he uses these incredibly rich Old Testament titles to describe Jesus as the eternal Word of God. So it's way less of a strict chronological biography and much more of a deep spiritual portrait.
All right, let's wrap this up with section 4. One story, 4 views.
So let's look at the final picture here. What we've discovered today is that these 4 guys weren't just taking robotic dictation from the sky. They were brilliant, thoughtful editors. They took the exact same historical events, the life of Jesus, and highlighted specific angles just to help their specific audiences survive some really tough times. Whether it was Mark comforting persecuted Romans, Matthew helping Jews navigate the devastating loss of their temple, Luke writing this grand inclusive history, or John just diving deep into high theology, their differences aren't mistakes. Actually, their differences are the entire point.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If these ancient writers had just sat down and copied out one single dry list of historical facts, instead of crafting these 4 intensely personal, completely unique perspectives tailored to real human struggles, would this story still be as captivating today? By giving us 4 different lenses, the Gospels actually offer this incredible 3D portrait of history that one single book could literally never capture. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those great questions, and I'll see you next time.